In this video, we're going to pick up where we left off, and we're going to take our two base materials and we're going to blend them together to create a complex material. And we're going to do this by using a new set of nodes here in Designer called the Material Blend node. Okay, so let's get started by just creating our new substance. So here we'll go to File, New Substance. And so here under my graph template, we're going to use the template that we created in the previous video. And so here it is for this graph name. I'm going to call this Metal Floor Rusty. And for the size mode, I'm going to start off this time with absolute, and I'm going to set this at, well, I'll do 1024 by 1024. And we'll leave everything else as is and click OK to create this substance. So now we're going to grab the instances of our base materials. Here we're just again picking up where we left off from the previous videos. If you're just now catching this and wanting to follow along, you can just open up these base materials and they'll be placed in the Chapter 3 Part 1 folder. And so far in this training, we've kind of been going step by step as we start to look at how everything works here in Designer. We started by, creating everything within one graph to make a material. We then talked about procedural material creation workflows, and now we're going to start to demonstrate the true power of Substance Designer in a sense that we've already created these as base materials, and now we're looking to create a new material. So what we're doing is we're just going back to our library here of our content that we've been creating, and then we're just creating instances of it and building upon what we've already done. And you can imagine that over time, as you create these base materials on your own, you'll have a vast library that you can constantly pull from. And like I said, this really illustrates the true power of Designer in creating these reusable base materials. So now we're going to come over to our library and we're going to grab our metal floor, left click, drag and drop to instance this here into our new metal floor graph. So here, if we take a look at this material comes in as a single node, and that's because we're viewing our graph here in material mode. So here at the top of the toolbar, I'm just going to uncheck this eyeglass icon here, and you'll notice that right next to our toolbar icon, we have this link creation mode. If I click this button, this reveals the modes in which we can work within our graph. And by default here, it's set to compact material. And then we have material and standard mode. And they have this 1, 2, and 3 keyboard shortcut next to them. Now, compact material and material mode both work the same way, meaning that they're going to allow you to work with all the channels as a single material entity. However, in material mode, and if I just hit the 2 on the keyboard, it shows these channels as expanded. However, you can see that they're still all connected as a material. Now, if I hit the 1 key on the keyboard, I can now work with individual channels. So here we'll hit the 3 key on the keyboard. This allows us to work with this as a single material, and we also have this auxiliary mask output that we created in one of the previous videos. So I'll double click this output, and here is this mask that we created. And we're going to use this later in our material blending process. So if I want to view this material here in my 3D view, I could first connect it to my outputs, or I could simply just right click and drag and drop it right here into the 3D view so that I can get a quick idea of what this material looks like. Now let's do the same thing. Let's grab our rust, drag and drop, let's instance this node in, right click, drag and drop to the 3D view, and now we can view this. So now what we're going to do is we're going to build up a more complex material utilizing these two base materials. And so what we need to do is start to blend these materials together. And we have a host of blending materials. So here in the library, if you come over here to Material Filters and this Blending category, we'll select this, you can see that we have a couple of these blending nodes that we can work with. And what we're going to do is we're going to start with this Material Blend node. So let's just left click, drag and drop, and place this here into our graph. And what this node allows us to do is blend two materials together. Now we have another material node called the multi-material blend. Let's just make an instance of this here into our graph. And you'll notice that this material works similar to our material blend. However, it has a setting here in our properties. And if we click this drop down here, we can choose more than 2 materials. So for instance, let's choose 8. Now we have 8 material inputs that we can choose. Now, as you'll see with this node, it's also going to allow you to blend using some type of image. In Material Blend, we're going to use a grayscale mask to blend between our two materials. In Multi-Material Blend, you use a color ID. We're not going to cover this multi-material blend in this video. Now, we also have this material switch. Let's bring this in, and this allows us to switch between 2 different materials. And then here we have our material color blend, and we are going to cover this node in this video. So here we have the core nodes for material blending. And one of the things that I want to point out is all these nodes have a similar workflow process. So for example, if I select material blend, notice that at the very top, we have options here for our channels. And by default, all of these material blend nodes are going to enable channels to work with both the metallic roughness and specular glossiness PBR workflows. And so what you're going to want to do is each time you set up these nodes, you're going to have to make sure that you have disabled and enabled the correct channels you want to blend with. So here at Material Blend, you can see that, well, diffuse is enabled and specular, and we're not going to need those. So what we're going to do is turn off diffuse, we're going to turn off specular, we're going to turn off glossiness. Here we do want our roughness and metallic, and our ambient occlusion. Since we are working with that, we need to enable that, and our height. So here I've set up the channels that we're going to work with this material blend. If we take a look at the multi-material blend node, so I'll select this, you can see that it has a similar channels setup. Same thing here with material switch and material color blend. So you can see that all of these nodes have this common channel setup. And you just need to be aware, again, of the channels that you're going to have to enable or disable so that you can blend them properly. So for now, let's take all these other nodes and just delete them. We're not going to worry about them. And we're going to work on or concentrate on blending our two base materials using this material blend node. So the way this works on this material blend, you'll notice that we have our two inputs, material 1 and material 2. And you can think of material 1 as the base and then material 2 as the material that's on top of the base. So we want our metal floor to be the base. So let's just take this material and just plug it into the material 1 connection. And let's take our rust and just plug this into material 2. So here we have our material. Let's right click and drag and drop this material here into our 3D view. And as you would expect, we have our rust, which is covering our metal floor. And the reason we can't see any of the metal floor is because we haven't input a mask that's going to tell the material blend node how to blend between these two materials. So now let's create a mask. Let's start by coming over here to our noises, and we're just going to grab one of these noises here. I think I'm going to go with this black and white spots 3. So let's just drag and drop this in, and let's take this noise and connect it to the grayscale mask input. And when I do that, you can see that we get an update here, and we're updating because we are viewing this node here into our 3D view. And now we can start to see a blend between our two materials. Now here, if I come over to the instance parameters here for this material blend, we have our channels. Let's just close this up since we've set that. Now you can see that we do have options for all the channels that we have enabled. Let's take a look at base color. So if I come over to base color, you can see that I can adjust the opacity or the blending mode. So say that I want to multiply the two base color maps together, I could do that with this multiply option. I'm not going to do that in this case, so I'm just going to leave it at normal, but you can see that you do have some control over the individual blending parameters of each of these channels. Same thing here with our normal. So here you can see that we have our normal. Just to get a better idea of what's happening, let's hit the 1 key on the keyboard to expand all of our channels, and let's double click this normal output here for this material blend node. I'm going to zoom in on the 2D view, and you can see that this node is automatically compositing or combining the normal map from our rust and the normal map from our metal floor. And you can see that we can adjust that blending amount based on this opacity slider. So at 1, we're getting a blend between both. Drag this all the way to 0, then we're only seeing that base material. Here I'll hit 3 on the keyboard again, just so that we can see this in material mode. And I just want to re-illustrate the fact that this metal floor is our base material. That's material 1. And that's why when we set this to 0, we're only seeing that base level. So here I could use this opacity control, a bit of an intensity effect in how this normal from our rust is being blended over top of the normal of our base metal floor material. In this case, I'm just going to leave it at 1 here. We also have similar controls for our roughness. Again, I'm going to hit 1 on the keyboard. Let's expand our channels, double click roughness, and here you can see that I have blending mode options. So if I wanted to multiply this, I could. I can leave this at normal. I can adjust my opacity. Same controls, and we have that here for our metallic, for our ambient occlusion, and for our height as well. So again, just something to realize that once you set your channels, the channels that you have enabled are going to have even more control here in their individual channel rollout parameters. Okay, so I'll hit 3 on the keyboard, and you can see that we now have a basic blend happening between our two base materials, and that blend is being controlled by this mask. So I'll double click, and this is the mask that we have. Now, of course, if I look at this, this isn't really the type of effect that I want. There's just way too many gray values in here, and so this blending that I'm getting here is just too soft. So I want to process this image input here, or excuse me, this grayscale mask, and I'm going to do that here by just using a histogram scan. So to make sure I just insert that between the noise and my material blend, I'll just select this connection, I'll hit the space bar, and start to type histogram. And here you see that I have my histogram scan node. Let's enable this. Now here, as soon as we enable this node, the position value set at 0 makes it black, which means we are now feeding in a full black to our grayscale mask, which essentially just masks out the second material altogether. So now we just see the metal floor. As I start to increase this position slider, you can see that we're now scanning through that range, that histogram range, and it gives us this really interesting effect of almost being able to dial in this roughness amount. So at 1, we're seeing 100% of our rust, and at 0, we're seeing 100% of our base material. And so this control here, as you can see, is going to give us a really cool parameter for dialing in a rust amount. And we'll get to that later in the video. So this is one way that I always like to use the histogram scan when it comes to blending these materials. Now, let's address this softness that is caused by the grayscale range here in our map. So here I can just simply adjust the contrast. So let's move this all the way up, something like this. And now I get more of the type of effect that I'm wanting to see. So as we start to just dial in our position, we start to get more rust, and this is what we're getting here. So we showed this in the chapter 1 video when we were just kind of blending all of this together within one graph. So this is nothing new here in this case. But again, I just like to illustrate, how this histogram scan node is often used when it comes to creating user-driven parameters like this. So now I'd like to work on this mask a bit more, because what's happening is it looks like our material, our rust, is just being pasted right over top of our metal floor. And well, that's essentially what is happening. So if we look at this, here in our normal map, we have these rivets here. And again, it just looks like this rust is just floating kind of on top of this. And we want to integrate this material, this rust material here, into this floor material a bit better. And so we're going to do that by utilizing this auxiliary mask that we created. So let's just make ourselves a little bit more room here in our graph, and I'm going to introduce a blend node. So let's grab our blend, and let's take our mask and plug that here into our foreground. Let's move our histogram out of the way, and let's take our noise and plug that here into the background. So now we're going to take a look at this blend node here, and we're going to switch the blending mode to add sub. And so here's kind of what we're getting. If I zoom in really close, now we can start to see that this dirt is kind of collecting here towards the base areas of these rivets. And I can kind of feather this a bit more by just dropping this opacity. So we'll drop the opacity down. So here you can see where the rust will be collecting more kind of in these areas and a little less right on top of the rivet, but it kind of bleeds over on some areas. And this is more of what I'm looking to do. So now let's take this blend and plug it into our histogram. And here's the effect that we get so far. So here's our histogram. Now we can go back to our histogram position and increase this value. So here's what we're getting now with this rust. And I think this looks a bit better. It just kind of integrates more into that base material, that metal floor. Maybe what we can do is just decrease our contrast now. So let's do that some more. All right, and I think that looks pretty good. So again, we can just adjust what we have here with our position. Just increase that contrast a little bit. Also, I'll go back to that blend, and I can work with the opacity on this guy. So here, let's pull that opacity down, maybe 0.33. Now we'll go back to the histogram scan, increase our contrast a bit, and here we go. So we'll just leave it at something like this. So here's now the effect that we're getting here with our blend. And now what we can do is just take this multi-material blend, its outputs, just plug them right here into our outputs of our graph. We'll right-click, View Outputs in 3D View, and then here we go. We now have our two base materials blended using this material blend node, and the blending is being driven by this mask here that we're creating. And back in chapter 2, we talked theory about what this method here is, and I called this the creation method 1, where we're taking base materials, again, here's our materials that we create, and we're combining them to create more complex materials. And this graph is much more simple than that original graph that we created back in chapter 1, where we just created this entire material, this rusty metal floor material, all within a single graph. Now we have control to go back into these graphs here and make changes. So for example, let me check something here. So let's just switch this up to a 2K resolution. So here you'll notice something. I have my resolution set to 2K. All of my nodes seem to be processing. However, if we look at this, the rust material is stuck at this 1024 by 1024. Now, in this particular case, it's not hurting things because it's still outputting here to 2K. The reason why this is happening is because in this material blend node, and this is the case for all blend nodes, especially here when we have this blend, which is our foreground background, you can think of this as foreground background as well. The metal floor's resolution is 2K, so it's coming in, and the resolution here is 1K, and it's coming in. So this material blend node is passing on the core resolution, or that base resolution, from material 1. So material 2, our rust, is getting sized up in this case. And here it seems to work out okay. But this may not be what we want to work with. So what we can do now is just go back and edit our rust. A really simple way to do that, we'll come over here to our rust, right click, and choose open reference. And here, that's just going to open a reference of our graph. In our Explorer window, you can see that here. So what I'm going to do here, just double click to get to that root level. We'll go back to our output size, and we're just going to set it to relative to parent. And now we'll just save, and we can simply just close this guy out. I don't need it here in my Explorer window, and let's go back to our metal rusty floor. And you can see that now the node automatically updates to 2K because its resolution is set to relative to parent, and this rust is now getting its resolution from the parent, which is this host graph that is set to 2K, as you can see here in the output size. So it becomes super easy to go in and edit these materials. Another point that I like to make with this, and here let's just demonstrate this with the metal floor. So now we have this metal floor. Let's right click and let's open a reference. We can think of this base material as like a black box now. As long as we don't change our outputs here, we can do whatever we want with all these nodes here. It's self-contained within this substance, this basic material substance that we've been talking about and creating here. And so we can make all kinds of different changes, new versions and so on, and we can update this so that it'll work correctly. Or we can make changes, say we figure out a better way to handle what we're doing here with our roughness, or generating our normal, or something like that. Or we want to add new parameters altogether, we can do that as well, as long as we don't change our outputs. Same thing goes if we had some inputs. Now, we haven't discussed that yet in this series, and we'll get to that later. But the idea, again, is just constantly think when you're creating your materials, they're like a black box. The inputs and outputs don't change, but whatever happens here on the inside, you can change that, update it, all you want. And when we take this back to our other graphs, as soon as we open them again, they'll automatically update. So now, let's say that we want to add some dirt on top of this material as well. And we don't actually have a dirt base material. Well, a node that we can use to kind of do this really quickly here in our blending for our material filters is this material color blend. So let me just show you how this works. So let's take the material color blend, let's drag and drop and place it here into our graph. And what we're going to do here is come over to our channels. Again, first step with these material color blend nodes, or excuse me, these material blends. We're going to disable the channels that we don't need. So diffuse, spec, gloss, and we also need to make sure that we enable here our ambient occlusion. So let me just double check this. We've got base, normal, rough, metallic, ambient occlusion, and height. Great, so these are the channels that we need. Let's take the output here of our blended materials and plug them into our material color blend. So now what we have, and if we come over to this material color blend, we'll just close up our channels. We have that same familiar options here that we have for the channels that we do have enabled. However, we've got some extra options. And what this is going to allow us to do is blend some color and data values to our channels. And it's going to propagate that information down to all the channels that we have enabled. So for instance, now here's our blended material that we are showing here in our 3D view. we now have a material color blend. And on our base color, this is going to allow us to add a color on top of this. Same thing here with our normal and our roughness, metallic, and so on. And we can actually control how these data values that we're going to be setting on this node are affecting the material based on this mask. So let's do the same thing. Let me come over here into my library, and let me come over to my noises, and let me just do a search here for grunge. Actually, let me see if I have anything with dirt. Yeah, we'll just try this dirt 1 here. So let's just drag and drop and place this guy into here. And then we'll just plug this into the grayscale mask. And we'll see what we can do with this here. All right, so now let's take these channels here from this node that we have, our material color blend, and just pipe this over here to our outputs. And so when I do that, you can see that, well, we're starting to get some type of mix happening here within our graph. Now that we have everything set up, we just need to go in and just start to change these values. And as you'll see, all these changes will automatically propagate to all the channels that we have. All right, so the way I like to work with this, I hit 1 on the keyboard, and I like to run through and just change each of these channels manually. So let's start here with our base color. So our base color, this is putting a white over top of everything, and I don't want that. So I'm just going to lower this value down to something that's kind of dark. And so here's what we're getting. I could also change my blending mode, so maybe I want to try a multiply on top. No, that's going to be too dark. Maybe a min. Yeah, let's do this. And like I said, I could feather that back here with some of this opacity if I want to. So there's my base color. Now my normal, let's see what's happening here with the normal. So I'll double click my normal channel. And right now, well, nothing's happening because it's saying here my source is going to be my height. So if I switch this here to mask, you can see now I'm starting to get normal information. And what's happening here is it's taking this mask input and it's going to generate normal information out of that and then blend that here with the normal that's coming in from our material blend node. Now, in this case, I don't really want all this kind of chatter noise here in my normal channel. So I'm just going to well, in this case, I can say height. And since I don't have any height information for this, it's not going to blend any data here. So I'm just going to leave this alone. So there's our normal. Let's take a look at our roughness. Now here for our roughness, you can see where this dirt is now adding on top of that. And if I were to switch this to a really dark value, that dirt would almost be like some type of oil-like material or wet material. I don't want to do that, so I'm just going to keep it maybe something like this. Maybe not full rough, but just a little something like this here. And then my metallic. So here's our metallic, and you can see that it is working correctly because this is a dirt, so it's a dielectric we're talking about. We need it to be black in our metallic map, and it's already set to that black. So that's good. That's going to work correctly for us. And our ambient occlusion, let's take a look at this. Well, here's an example. Right now, we're just saying this dirt. What it's doing is it's taking this dirt, and if we look at the ambient occlusion, it's just creating a white value. If we wanted to drop that, we could. So now the dirt is, showing as black here. We don't want to do that, so I'm going to keep it as white, and that'll work. Now, let's take a look at our height. Now here, I don't want this dirt to affect the height at all. So what I'm going to do in this case is just drop this all the way down to 0. And actually looking at this, I can see where my height or the rust is affecting my height as well. And I don't want that either. So now I'm going back to my material blend node and I'm coming over to my height and I'm going to set that opacity as at 1. So it's just blending the two together. I'm going to drop that to 0. And so when I do that, this is the height that I get. So remember I said before, I don't want a lot of this kind of high frequency noise and all that in my height channel. I just want it to kind of help me with the silhouette here of the shape. And in that case, I'm talking about the rivets here for the floor. And so I didn't want that rust to be combining with that height information. And so this also kind of illustrates the importance of going into like standard mode and viewing the channels one by one, because it helps you to kind of troubleshoot or really get a look at how this data is being mixed together. And you can see that once you kind of just look at the map, it's just real easy switch here on the slider to get the effect that you want. So here in this case, this guy is all set up now. And so here's this dirt effect. What's really awesome about this again is that we have this single mask here, and this mask is generating a material for us on the fly just using this material color blend. And we quickly set up this mask material by just changing these values here for this channel control that we have on the node. And now we could go in and just change the grunge map itself. So let's just add a new grunge here. Maybe try something like this. And we'll bring this guy in, and I'll just switch this. Here you can see I'm having just a little bit of an issue like hitting that. So sometimes I just tap 1 on the keyboard just to go out of material mode, and I can just plug it in easily. Hit 3 again to go back. And so now you can see here's just a completely different mask, and here's what's happening to it. I could do the same thing here. I could hit my space bar. Let's grab a blend. Let's take this dirt. Let's just get rid of it. And I'm going to grab my little auxiliary mask again. Let's plug it into here. Let's plug this guy in. And this time we'll do an add sub. So here's what we're getting. We'll drop our opacity. And then we'll plug this output of this blend here as the grayscale mask. And now here's the effect that we're getting. I'll just lower this opacity. Well, here I'll bring it up a little bit more. There we go, something like that. So now I've just got another layer on top of this just by simply using this material color blend node. And again, if we zoom out, the graph is very simple to work with. It's very readable. We can see that we're blending our materials. Here are our masks that we're generating. And then we're just outputting here, well, our outputs. So now we'll just create a few parameters so that we can create this complex material as more of a reusable material. So what I'm going to do is come over to my histogram scan, and for the position, we're going to expose this, and let's give this a new name here. So we'll click new, and this is going to be our rust underscore amount. This is going to become our identifier name, so I usually use this type of naming structure, and we'll click OK and OK. So now let's come back over here to our dirt, and let's use a histogram scan as well. So we'll select this connection, hit the space bar, start to type out histo, and here we have the scan node already shows filtered. Let's select this guy. Again, it's black by default, so what we need to do is just increase our position. This gives us kind of this dialing up effect. Now what I'm going to do on this guy is just leave the contrast at 0 because this particular grunge map here is already kind of contrasty enough. So this is going to work. Let's use this position again. So we click this function button. We'll do expose, and we're going to give it a new name. And this time we're going to call this dirt underscore amount. And we'll click OK and OK. Let's double click to get to our root level of our graph. And here's our input parameters. For our label, I'm just going to call this rust amount. And then for our dirt label, we'll call this dirt amount. And so now we have these controls that allow us to dial in the rust and the dirt amount for this complex material. Now, I haven't actually saved this yet, so that was kind of risky of me. So let's go ahead and save it now. So we'll save. And I've just made a few changes here to the tutorial structure. So if we come over here to tutorial, you can see that I've got chapters 1, 2, and 3. So in chapter 3, what I did was I actually labeled these as the parts to correlate to the video. So this is part 4 of chapter 3. So we're going to save this here into that part 4 folder. So we'll save. And then again, if we wanted to, we can come over here to our attributes. So here, I'm going to put this in as metal as well. And the description here, I'll say floor with controls for rust and dirt amounts. And of course, you could use a more readable label here for the name that's going to appear in the library. If you leave this blank, it's just going to show whatever you have here for the identifier. And finally, we would do our icon. So we've covered that in the previous video, so we'll just kind of leave this here for now, and I'll save. Here you can see, since I saved this substance into a subfolder that is part of my library, my custom library path, it automatically shows up as soon as I save it here in my library. So underneath my metal category, which I gave it here, here's my metal floor rusty. So I have metal floor and metal floor rusty. And that is going to take care of our basic introduction to utilizing these blending nodes to blend our two base materials together.